Hello, everybody. Welcome to Woman Up. My name's Leah, and as usual, I'm joined by Sue. Hello,
Hi,
Sue.
Leah. How are you?
Good, thank you. Today we are delighted and very grateful to be joined by Jon Uhler. Jon is a
Or
certified
Euler, but that's fine.
Jon is a certified clinical trauma professional and licensed professional counsellor. He's also a certified sex offender treatment provider and has spent decades working closely with both the survivors of sexual abuse and with some of the most mentally disturbed and sexually deviant individuals, including inside prison. And it's this vast experience that has equipped him with the unique insights into the dark motivations and psyches of the perpetrators of sexual abuse. In addition to leading group sessions with both sex offenders and their victims, Jon's expertise provides a distinctive viewpoint on the intersection and influences of sexually deviant behaviours and the mass gender deception that we are currently witnessing sweeping throughout Western society. Thank you for joining us, Jon.
My privilege.
I'm going to just kick off and say we are in Queensland, and we are just about to have the sex self-ID laws pass. Well, they've passed, but they're not quite law yet. So for anyone that doesn't know what that means that anyone can just choose what sex they want to be legally recognised as, and they have access to services, spaces, sports, anything that's just designated for that particular sex. So women like me and Sue have been harassed, assaulted for saying no very clearly. So, Jon, in your experience, why do these men hate us so much? And why are we correct in our determination for never affirming these men as women and allowing them into ours and our children's spaces?
I'll even go one step further. In my professional opinion, women should be extremely concerned. This is the existential threat. What you're dealing with, the trans movement has compressed within it a lot of different concerns. I have a podcast entitled Unmasking the Trans Movement, and that focuses on the dangers to kids. But the trans movement is the world's greatest lie. Okay, the world's greatest scam, scheme, and ruse against the most vulnerable of populations. And I can defend that professionally, part of that is clinically. I'm old enough now, I've been doing therapy for about 30 years, so I can tell you definitively it doesn't exist. Now, of course it exists, or we wouldn't be talking right now. But it is man-made. Jennifer Billick and I couldn't be further on the political spectrum. But this issue that we're talking about, and we'll focus on deviant men, should align all good people on all sides of every political aisle. Because this has to do with the targeting of kids. It has to do with parental rights being targeted. And it has to do with facilitating the predation of women and children. And my background enables me to speak to all of the above. I've worked with survivors. So I'm very concerned about how perpetrators target people, primarily women and children. And the trans deception enables that. I've worked with severely emotionally disturbed kids in the system, in residential care, in residential treatment. So those are out-of-home situations where kids are being raised in an institution, as it were, or a facility. Those kids are very susceptible, and those are the ones that are being targeted most heavily, foster kids. And then you have the other part of my professional background, which is now about 15 years working with sex offenders. The full range or continuum of men who have offended. There's about 8 different categories that comprises. This is what I call the predator's best friend. So when legislation is being passed to enable these men, and the way to describe these men, since they have XY chromosomes, it doesn't matter how you dress up a man. It doesn't matter what he says about himself. The question is, does he have XY chromosomes? Yes, he does. The vast majority of these men are sexually deviant. The ones that are forcing this issue represent a real threat to the safety of women and children. I cannot emphasize that enough. Having worked with the most heinous of sexual predators, I ran one of Pennsylvania's specialized forensic sex offender treatment units for sexually violent predators. I ran that for a year. I was the first clinical staff in the US to start an intensive treatment program for for men in long-term solitary confinement, which comprised of all sorts of offenses. I've worked with serial rapists, murderers, men that have done heinous things to women and children, dismembered bodies. I've worked in ways that no academic researcher would ever be able to. If you're an academic researcher, you have maximum about 3 days with an inmate. That has to be arranged. It's under very close supervision. The inmate knows he's being recorded. Well, what kind of information are you going to get from that? How about from pedophiles? They're practicing for parole in every interview. The only way to really get at the minds and the motives of sexual deviants is to work with them and have access to information about them and to record them 24/7 for a long period of time, because these are the world's greatest liars.
Jon,
that's what people need to understand.
Sorry about that. There's a number of female politicians that are advocating for this, and just wondering, how do these women get so manipulated that they will push this gender ideology onto other women and children? So is it because of narcissistic traits of the person how do they get around women that should know better?
Yeah, excellent question, right? That is it's probably a number of things depending upon the woman. You may have a desire to make nice because it is so disarming. And that's one thing that your viewers need to understand about psychopaths. There's two kinds. I'm certified in the Hair Psychopathy checklist. That's the PCLR. That's the gold standard of forensic assessments of assessing psychopaths for court-related issues. I can do that professionally. I've done that. So I know what I'm talking about. Okay, and I've worked in prison system for 11 years and now what we call on the street. So I do sex offender treatment. Currently, I have 4 groups, almost ready to have to start my 5th. And that's within the span of 2 years. So think about what's happening to our societies. A psychopath, and there are 2 kinds. There's the kind that most of us think of when we hear that word. That is the horror movie. That's the first thing that's going to come to anybody's mind, but that's called the bloody psychopath. There's another category, and Robert Hare himself, the author of the PCLR, coined this term. It's called the white-collar psychopath. Now, where do we find those? My contention is we find them all over the place. Now, Robert Hare himself said if he hadn't worked in prison with these men, and he actually didn't work inside the prison, he had the inmates brought out to him so he could scan the brains. So the brain scan of a psychopath, what science has been able to demonstrate is that a psychopath's brain is different. There is no question. If you scan the brain of a psychopath, you will see that their brain responds differently than a normal person. But the tricky thing is you can't see the person's brain unless you scan it. So could you or could I have interacted with a psychopath and not know it? 100% guaranteed, yes, and you have. That's how prevalent I think psychopaths are. Now, how many are out there? I don't know, but how many does it take to disrupt somebody's life? Robert Hare himself said that if he hadn't worked with them in the prison population, he would have studied them on Wall Street. What does that tell you? He's written a book called Snakes in Suits, focused on upper management, focused on CEOs, those climbing the corporate ladder. Well, what does that tell you? So where do you find psychopaths? You find them in politics. You find them in finance. You find them in psychology. You find them in law enforcement. You find them in education. You find them in medicine. You find them in sports. You find them wherever there are people. And psychopaths are characterized by three essential characteristics. And in my estimation, it's not nurture, nature, or genetics. Things may play a role, but for every situation you can find where a psychopath came out of that environment or that situation, you can find people that have had resilience and turn out to be just fine. So what is it about the psychopath? My contention is it comes down to conscience. If you violate your conscience long enough, guess what? That's what makes us all uncomfortable. How do you make a psychopath? You violate your conscience long enough and you're well on your way. I'm convinced you'll go through a couple different stages. One will be narcissism. Because if you violate your conscience, why are you doing that? It's because of ego and self. So if you allow selfishness to grow, it will start to morph. It'll grow like a snowball. And you'll become the center of your own universe. What do we call that? We call that narcissism. If you're a low-level narcissist, one that's not very polished, and this will lead into psychopathy and why people believe them. If you're not very adept at working people, people will find you out very quickly. Your narcissism will become a stench, and people won't want to be around you very long because you're pretty apparent. If you start to figure out that you're going to be able to work people, the more finesse you have, then you're going to develop the quality of How to Win Friends and Influence People, Dale Carnegie's book. You're going to begin to become a very good salesperson. So you already feel now self-entitled to manipulate people. Now you're gaining the ability with finesse. So now we're talking car sales and other kind of sales. Now you're a sociopath. Sociopath has no conscience, but they're not going to prove a point. They're in for what they can get, and they will operate on a cost-benefit analysis. Once the cost starts to outweigh the benefit, they'll move on. If they keep going in this dynamic, though, they'll get to a point where it's not about the benefit, but it's about having a negative effect. But think about the skills I've already learned. So the one thing a psychopath will do that a sociopath won't do is a psychopath will stop all things and go to war. A psychopath will say this, and when you have a group of guys in prison, you can tell psychopaths versus sociopaths. There's many more sociopaths. They're actually shocked by what comes out of a psychopath's mouth, such as a psychopath will say these words, a sociopath won't. A psychopath will look at you when you set a boundary, and the psychopath will say, game on. Sociopath won't do that. Why is a sociopath going to do that when there's other greener pastures? He'll say, well, it was fun while it lasted. We had good times, and off he goes. Okay, a psychopath has to have the last word, last say, last laugh. Their character is different. They've been violating their conscience, so they've reached a point, and it starts with sociopathy. So they're already a narcissist. Now they're moving into being a sociopath. By that time, because they've violated conscience long enough, they're not sorry for what they do, so there goes remorse, and they don't care about the effect, so there goes empathy. So a psychopath and a sociopath have no remorse, no empathy, because they have no conscience. What they learn along the way, unless they're an impulsive one, and these are not the ones that we're talking about, impulsive sociopaths and psychopaths don't do much planning, and they don't get away with a lot. They get away with a lot for a moment, but then they get busted. The ones that are able to work things in to their advantage, the ones that can strategize, the ones that have a long-term goal, that's not impulsivity. These are individuals who can manipulate the impression that people have of them. So we call that impression management. So in the psychopath's brain, what you will find is the area of the occipital region will light up when, for the average person, it doesn't have to when they're feeling certain things. So a psychopath isn't feeling what we normal people feel. They are analyzing the situation in order to give you what you need to hear in order for them to get what they want. So they know how to pull your strings. They know how to manipulate you. So if you're a politician and you are needing to be needed, they will come across that way. They will come across as very sensitive. If you are needing to be a savior of sorts, then they will come across as very mild-mannered and just needing to be protected. So they'll play to that. If you have residual hatred towards certain groups, such as you resent people that come from a traditional family value type of approach, they will play to that. They're going to play you. If they can find another psychopath, all the better, because then they can harmonize. All they need is someone. So all a predator, and a psychopath is a predator. A sociopath is going to work you, is going to override your boundaries. That's what it's all about. For instance, with sales, what do I want? I want your wallet. I have one of two ways of getting it. If I'm not very smart, I'm going to pull out a weapon. You're going to have to hand it to me. I'm going to jail. But if I can get you to willingly take out your wallet and even like the experience, a good customer experience, then you're satisfied and I'm very satisfied. I've just upsold you a vehicle that's way beyond your ability to make the payments, but I feel good about myself. Why? Because I was able to work you. But I'm not going to force you to sign it. When it comes to deviant men, what do I mean about deviant? Deviance is different than lust, and this is what the majority of people don't understand. So what's going on in the trans movement is this. You have a number of populations that are converging. You have kids that are being used, vulnerable kids. Most of those kids have a couple different characteristics. They've been sexually abused or had their boundaries crossed or violated. They are on the autism spectrum. Those two categories right there make it very difficult for those two populations to discern what their intuition is telling them. That's what every predator is going to work. Going to work your intuition. Since I have no conscience, if I'm a predator, then there's nothing to stop me. I have no conscience from overriding your boundaries, your financial boundaries, your sexual boundaries, whatever it is that I want. So the only thing left to stop me is you and your intuition. And therefore, just like every cult leader knows, I have to get you to discount or distrust your intuition. So I'm working you. We call that grooming. It's not just sexual grooming, but grooming is simply I'm causing you to dispense with your intuition. Psychopaths have also learned one other thing by the time they become a psychopath. They've learned certain art, or an art of being able to overcome these boundaries. And there's one thing that I've coined called the big lie theory. Since, in my estimation, psychopaths once had a conscience, they have an advantage. They know how we think. They know that somebody with a conscience will project onto someone else that somebody else has a conscience, meaning we will tend to give somebody the benefit of the doubt. That's why we hesitate to think the worst of someone. We hesitate to be suspicious because we wouldn't want someone to be suspicious of us. So now it gives someone without a conscience a lot of leverage because now they can feign being hurt or being surprised if we start to question their motives. They'll even do it with facial expressions. I can't believe. Are you suggesting that I'm dressed this way so that I can actually go into the women's room? That I can go into the washroom, I can go into the locker, I can go into the women's showers? Are you suggesting that I would actually want to see women naked and taunt them and make them feel uncomfortable? Are you suggesting I'm that kind of guy that would be up in a tree looking in a woman's window? I can't believe you would eat. And what's happened? I'm playing, some people call it playing upon their kindness. I'm playing upon your goodwill, when in reality, if I'm one of those deviant guys that are dressed in drag and women's underwear, what I've been doing last night is I've been masturbating the very thought of coming into your locker room because I've joined your swim team. Why? Because I want the medals. These men don't care about the medals at all. What they care about is denying women and traumatizing women and accessing women in such a way that that these deviant men can't get arrested.
Yeah.
That's what motivates these guys, because pornography creates a malevolence within the male psyche towards women. That's why deviant men think it nothing to place their hand around the neck of a woman and begin to choke her. People need to understand the stages of deviance. Deviance by nature is different than lust. And that's another thing that people don't understand. And I didn't know until prior to working with men who offend. And the average, or these guys, I was going to say the average sex offender, but these guys, now, what are we talking about? I call them pre-arrested sex offenders. That's who wants access into the private spaces of women and children. Unless you can track them 24/7, unless you've been watching what they've been watching, you have no clue what these guys are into. And I can tell you from working 15 years clinically with these kinds of guys exactly what they're into and what's going through their mind and what they've been doing the night before. They're trying to access locker rooms and showers. Men are going on to women's sports teams. Men are wanting access to female prisons. Men are wanting access to rape shelters. Men are wanting access to kids through libraries for one and only one reason: to gain direct hands-on access. And what's going on in the heart and mind of the kind of man that is doing that is very different than what we think, what the average person thinks. And he is morphed into someone who can only get an erection when he knows he's traumatizing a woman. That's what deviance is. It's different than lust. And that's why if you ever hear that a pedophile has no problem, would be willing to be castrated, chemically or actually surgically castrated, if that would permit them to get out of prison, people need to understand that that won't change their offending, because it is not hormones and it is not the issue of lust that causes offending. It is, and it's more than power and control. It's the desire to harm, to scar and mar and traumatize. I can do that to someone if I'm that kind of person. I've been around him so long, I can imitate him. I can do that to you, meaning I have designs for that if I'm that kind of person, with a smile. Predators don't come with the sign on them that says, I'm a predator. And that's what the public needs to understand. So these female politicians, I don't care male or female, but these female politicians at best are being useful idiots to some very dangerous men. I have made a number of videos, a multiple part video with a coworker, a counterpart of myself, a treatment specialist from the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. And it is called At Risk. What happens when men are allowed in women's prisons? And I can assure you, and I've made a challenge. I've never had any prison entity take me up on it. I'll issue the challenge again. Whether state or provincial or federal, on a federal level, at your expense, Mr. Department of Corrections, you fly me in, pay for my study, right, or pay for my time, but give me complete access to all your records and all inmate records, and I will prove to you 100% that 100% of the men that are trying to get into the female prisons are a threat to women, 100% of them. It's not just 50% that are the sex offenders.
To think that these men are being allowed into women's prisons. And it makes me think that the women or men politicians, I don't really care what sex they are. I feel like they must have psychopathic tendencies, because they've got no remorse and no empathy, like you mentioned, for the women that have to put up with these men in their prisons.
Right.
And I think they're worse than useful idiots. I think they're actually dangerous, these politicians.
A case could be made. I mean, you have to be brain dead not to be able to figure this out. Some people say, well, only 50% are sex offenders. Oh, only 50. Okay. So only 50%, but I'm going to tell you 100% of them are. Now, what does it take to become a sex offender? You have to have a sex offense on paper. I have 4 guys right now in my sex offender groups, among my 4, that on paper, they have no sex offense. Why have they been referred into my groups for sex offender treatment? Because they took a plea deal.
Oh, yeah.
And if you look far enough, and that's why I've never had any state or federal entity, as far as prison system, take me up on my offer, because they know exactly what I'll find. I know what I'm looking for. Why? Because on psych staff, I had access to all the files. Right? I can dig deep. And what you'll find is 100% of those guys have been arrested and charged for offenses against women, but it was never taken to court, or they did a plea deal. So only half have on paper charges against women. 100% represent an active threat towards women. They will harm women. It's only a matter of time.
Yeah. Well, me and Sue have experienced it in real life.
Yeah.
But our pleas and our the evidence that we've submitted to our government has just been completely ignored, and that's from thousands of other women as well.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, was that within a prison system?
No,
just generally.
But just in general, that's right.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't matter. But especially, can you imagine being confined? Because females, when they offend, the overall population of men within a prison, you can do sort of a bell-shaped curve as far as degrees of harm, but every offense will be represented within a male population, within a male prison. You can find every kind of offense. In terms of severity within a female prison, you're going to tend to find one of 2 extremes. They really come down to this. The more passive kind of offenses, and a lot of those had to do with drugs and alcohol and being manipulated by guys. And the vast majority of women in prison were sexually abused or have been sexually abused. The vast majority, at least in Pennsylvania, so it has to be the same all around the world, quite frankly. In terms of severe mental health issues, in a women's prison, it is doubled than that of a male prison. So you're sending a male into a population of women that are confined. You're going to put one of these deviant guys in a 15 by 9 room, and she can't say a thing. This is a recipe for disaster. So people need to understand that these men are not normal men, and they're not normal because they have overridden their conscience. And in the year 2023, we can go back decades, you will never find a sexual offense that does not have at its basis and at its core pornography. 100% of offenses, ever since the internet and pornography, or pornography and the internet, certainly when I started in the prison system, 2005, it was true then. I would say probably back to the 80s, you're never going to find a sex offense without a guy being deeply steeped in pornography prior to offending. And there are stages that these guys go down to. And what I say is this: you will not have any guy that comes out in public that's wearing women's underwear and drag, women's underwear and women's clothing in public that is not deeply steeped in pornography. It's 100%. And you don't know what he was accessing last night, do you? Right? If you're anybody that's going to try to defend these guys, you don't know what he's going to go home and do. And you notice in the private spaces, they're always, where's my for effect? Right here. why do they always have one of these? They're in a private space, women, and they always have this. Well, last time I checked, what's on the back of that thing?
Yeah.
They are filming. And they're going back home and they're uploading. They're probably making money off the women. That's why Leah Thomas, the deviant guy, the female swimmers now come out and say they were traumatized by the guy. Of course, because when a guy becomes deviant, it's all about having a negative impact, a negative effect. When you're a normal guy, you cannot get aroused, you cannot get an erection unless your partner, your spouse, unless you know she's enjoying herself. As a matter of fact, that's why we say, let's say just before climax, the woman says, these spots on the ceiling, I really need to clean the ceiling. Okay, if you're dealing with a normal guy and you give that scenario, right, most guys go, oh, why? She ruined the mood. Okay, That's a normal man. He knows that his wife, his partner, is not into him, and so he can't get an erection. That's normal. What do you think is going on in the heart of a man where he gets an erection knowing that he's traumatizing a woman?
Mm-hmm.
You're dealing with a predator. You're dealing with a psychopath. You're dealing with somebody that's different and took years to get that way. And that's my message to politicians, to people that are pushing this unknowingly. How can you unknowingly push this trans stuff? Yeah. That you have to understand that you cannot separate pornography and the trans movement. And when it comes to these men, as a matter of fact, the men that are doing this breastfeeding stuff and the men that want wombs and all that, people need to understand this. Do I really feel strongly about it? I'll tell you how strongly, right? They're an imminent danger to women. Why? Because they're toying with the public. They're seeing how stupid the public is to believe them. Mm. Does any guy really think he can breastfeed? Absolutely not. Mm-hmm. He's play acting. Mm. He's seeing how stupid we are. Meanwhile,
I don't believe a single man believes that he is actually
not a single one. No. They're seeing how stupid the public is. Why? They're grooming the public. They're seeing if they will have boundaries. If they know that, just like every cult leader as well understands, every manipulator, every predator knows. Again, if I'm a predator, my success depends upon the extent to which I can get you to dispense with your intuition, which basically says this. Well, I thought but maybe right? Now you're second guessing yourself. A predator knows when he's done his job properly, when you pick up where he's left off. So he has no conscience. There's nothing going to stop him from crossing your boundaries. The only thing left is you and your intuition. So he's starting to cross your boundaries financially, sexually, whatever. And you start to say, I'm not sure. And what's he going to do? He's going to say, oh, come on, it's fine. I can't believe you think that about me. How? I'm really hurt. I can't, after all we've been through, after all I've done, what is he doing? He's getting you to feel guilty. And eventually, what are you doing with your intuition? You're turning the volume down in your intuition. And now you're dropping the boundaries. If I'm a perpetrator, if I'm a predator, if I'm a manipulator, if I'm a cult leader, I know I got you. When I hear you say to somebody else, and that's why they're always going to isolate you from anybody, right? But when somebody else says, Sue, that Uhler guy, I've got concerns about him. I think it seems like if I'm a perpetrator and I hear you defend saying, well, I know what it looks like, but it's really not that. That's the phrase. That's the push. So if I'm a perpetrator, if I'm a predator, if I'm a manipulator, if I'm a cult leader, I'm going to, in one way or another, I'm going to use the phrase, I know what it looks like, but it's really not that. Mm. So I say, you know what? You're not dealing with a normal guy if he's wearing women's underwear.
So, John, what do you think? Like in Australia, we've got this one prolific trans extremist, I'd say, and he's got 3 women that he targets. It's myself, Leah, and Angie Jones, who you've spoken to before.
Invite him onto the program. He and I can debate. I'd love to talk. What's the person's name?
I don't know if we should mention it.
Okay, because I went toe to toe
We'll
on
tell you
Twitter.
off air. We'll tell you off air.
Okay, because I've on a regular basis, and you can pass this invitation along to anybody, any of these guys, because I have a live Friday night program, and come on my program, and we'll have a little chat. We'll have a discussion. We'll have a debate.
I would say there was less than a 0% chance that he would do that.
Oh, I know. Because they know, because the very first question I'm going to ask them is, how long have you been accessing porn? Because that changes, that clarifies the narrative. If I tell people, which is a reality, that no man gets to a point where he thinks it's a reasonable proposition to dress in women's underwear and drag in public without having access thousands of hours of pornography.
Well, this guy in particular was just a normal bloke, wasn't he? Up until his 20s. And then...
Well, he appeared to be a normal guy, right? The guys I work with, if you didn't know, right? If you nobody can, it's confidential. But let's say somebody could access the group that I do. These guys aren't frothing at the mouth, or they're not drooling at the mouth. They would look like you would. And by the way, you wouldn't know, right? If you walked into that group, you would think it's a men's group. So what does a sex offender look like? What does a guy look like who's been accessing tons of pornography? Why would anybody have gotten in the car with Ted Bundy? Because he didn't look like a freak.
Yeah. So how dangerous do you think that these men will get for people like ourselves who are in opposition to what they want? And if we continue to stand in their way, how dangerous are they?
Well, they'll do whatever they need to do. Now, it depends, right? Could they physically take somebody out? Well, if they could get away with it. Oh, yeah. I can hear now, not you two, but right, somebody, John, how can you say that? Oh, I don't know, 15 years, worked in prison for 11 and a half years. I've worked with guys that nobody suspected. People were shocked that the guy, once it hit the news, how many people have gone to churches and found out by seeing their pastor on the news, and they say, "No, not my pastor, not coach so and so, not teacher so." No, can't. I know that guy. Even somebody from Hollywood was just sentenced to life, or I forget how many years. I forgot the guy's name. Right? We're shocked. We don't want to believe it, and that's what they know. Now, what are they capable of? Psychopaths are capable of anything. Now, the more restrained they are, the more they will use tactics. The one thing they will do is this: they will punish and destroy. They will punish you in whatever way they can. They're going to get the greatest bang for their buck. They will destroy. It'll start with destroying and besmirching your reputation. They will destroy, if they can, your livelihood. They will destroy your ability to sound like you're protective. They will make you sound like you're exploitive and you're horrible and you hate people and you hate women because you don't want deviant guys in women's sports and in women's private spaces, so you must hate women. Right? But they do it in such a way, with such finesse, that they draw people in. That's why to really understand the pushers of the trans deception, you have to understand the methods of manipulations of the most sophisticated of cults. I recommend studying Scientology and the former sex cult Nixium that was headed up by Keith Raniere and Allison Mack. They're the classic tactics, how you get someone to, and very bright individuals, to not only begin to doubt themselves, but eventually to get sucked into and then align themselves with and then defend people that are taking them for a ride. How do you do that? Over time. It's mental and emotional manipulation. People don't like the term brainwashing anymore because that sounds too stark. But how do the idea of drink the Kool-Aid, where did that come from? I'm old enough, right, to say that came from Jonestown. Jim Jones was a cult leader, a religious cult leader, a supposed pastor out on the west coast of the U.S., and took his church down to Guyana and set up a compound, and he was perping. But before the feds were going to come in, the federal government in the U.S. started to get concerned and send a congressman down, and they murdered the congressman, and so the gig's up. So he convinces, Jim Jones did, all these adults, many of whom were parents, to give cyanide-laced Kool-Aid, to consume it and to give it to their kids. And I think about 700, I forget the exact number, but hundreds of people died. And the question is, how do you convince a mother to, as a matter of fact, they had a speaker system. I've heard the recording of it. The female voice was saying, don't worry about the cries of your children. They will be fine. This is for their best interest. And how do you get someone to go against their instincts of self-preservation and love for their own child? It's exactly what's being employed in the trans deception and these deviant men. So you have dark special interests that are using this grand scheme that didn't exist. There is no such thing as trans, by the way. It's a made-up term. There are confused people. There's no trans kids. There's no trans adults. There are people that are confused, gender confused. There's no such thing as trans. It's just a manufactured term. They made it up. And they've said it so often, now it's like the emperor has no clothes. Everybody's afraid to say, I don't think this thing exists.
Well, it was transsexuals and transvestites, and then it got rebranded into trans.
Right. So they play on it, and they play on different little terms. But the idea, born in the wrong body, no, that's called delusion. We used to call that a delusional disorder. Somebody said, I'm not a boy. Well, you are a boy. Well, no, now we have to label them as a delusional disorder. Well, you look at how many girls, so that's where you know it's not real, because it used to be boys that if a boy was going to get, if a child was going to get confused, it typically was a boy. But rare is the time. And so what happened was, as this thing has been pushed, the deviant guys, and I'll tell you ultimately, in the Trojan horse of the trans movement, so the trans Trojan horse, the last special interest that's going to hop out, waiting for everybody else to do the heavy lifting, are the pedophiles. This is the greatest gift. Those that are pushing pedophilia and been working to get pedophilia legalized, this is their golden ticket. Now, they know that they can't sell pedophilia, except for Tatchell, that guy, right? What they do is they're doing an end run on age of consent. So they have started to float and introduce terms such as bodily autonomy, mature minors.
Yeah.
It's very subtle. And they've used the COVID thing, right, as the back door as well.
Yeah.
So this ultimately is the gift that keeps on giving for the pedophiles, because these pedophiles will be saying a number of things. That child is mature, and I just have a very young spirit. Do you know how many guys in my groups over the years have talked about that? Well, we must have harmonized in our spirits. She's just very mature for her age, and I'm just really youthful. Really? You're 40 and she was 9. I know it, but in the spirit, we really... Okay. These guys will rationalize just about anything.
The age thing is really concerning. I want to ask you about the surgery, because we found out that in our town, a plastic surgery was willing to surgically remove the breasts off of 13-year-old girls. They told me that. And I want to know, in your experience, what is going on in the mindset of a surgeon who is willing to lay down a 13-year-old girl on their operating table and remove the breasts off of that girl. Are they doing it out of psychopathic tendencies? And are they taking
not tendencies, right? Not tendencies. They are a psychopath.
Yeah.
Why are they doing it? Cash.
Yeah, right. Because I saw one post from a young girl who said she found on her surgeon's Instagram page or TikTok her severed breasts. And she didn't know that he was going to be posting that. And he posted a picture of these 2 severed breasts on his TikTok page. And I just thought, much more depraved can society get? What is going on?
I need to be mindful. I need to be mindful of my facial expressions, right? Once you work around psychopaths and felons, and no, that's how despicable these individuals are. One of the most prolific, I think she's in hiding now, one of the most prolific breasts slicers were Dr. Gallagher, a female out of Miami.
Yeah.
And she has had the nerve on her little TikTok page and Facebook page. I have screenshots of it. They're probably still there, of parties on her yacht. She lives in a extremely luxury condo overlooking Miami Beach. And she's doing TikTok videos trying to get kids at that time, before the law was suddenly changed, to get more business, all geared toward young kids. Well, who would do that? A Nazi doctor?
Yes.
That's all. What's it take to be a Nazi doctor? Forget the country, right? What's it take to be, what kind of doctor would do that? Psychopath. See, again, we can't believe, and that's the thing, that predators know us better than we know them. And again, they know that we have a conscience. So the average person that, psychological mental dissonance says this, no, nobody would do that. There you go.
Yeah.
Right. That means, in my mind, there's a point beyond which no one would go. That's because I don't understand a psychopath. Part of it is also we don't understand our own hearts. Because we would say, well, I never do that.
Me and Sue we get that reaction. It's not happening. Yeah. They're not doing that.
Right? No, right. And we all, right? Because what would it be like to get to a point, I'm probably further along than the average person, to realize, what's within the human heart. I mean, how do you explain all the massacres? How do you explain Nazi Germany, or what the Chinese did, or the Japanese did? But it's been all throughout human history. It's within the human heart. And so my contention is this: if you unleash the human heart, you remove 100% of conscience, you will find that there's a psychopath within us all. We don't want to believe that, and hopefully it's because we have a conscience. But even look at the movie Tangled, right, of a number of years ago. You have Mother Gothel and Rapunzel. So Rapunzel and Flynn Rider in that story, and Mother Gothel is the one that she kidnapped this kid, raised her as her own, raising her in a tower. But Mother Gothel is a white-collar psychopath who becomes a bloody psychopath. After all the finesse wore off, out came the chains and the dagger. How many women could say, yeah, that sounds like my mother-in-law? Okay, I'm going to get myself in trouble. But the question is, how do we explain when people are willing to sell people out? Right? I don't know if Adolf Hitler ever pulled a trigger. It's an interesting thought. But look what he was able to do. So again, all a psychopath needs at first is for us to give them the benefit of the doubt, that there's a line beyond which that they wouldn't cross, because then they can play that, and they can read me. And that's why the guys in my groups know they're not going to pull that with me, because I know if they hadn't been busted, it would have kept going and it would have gotten worse. No, they weren't going to turn themselves in. They had been accessing porn a long time, and no, it wasn't a mistake. That's the very first place I start with sex offenders, because 100% of them, or 99% of them, over the span of 15 years, I can count on one or two fingers the guys that came out with the accurate description of their offense.
So we've got a breach of psychopaths that is controlling the Western world. So have we got governments? I know you said that, yes, they are in governments, but how have they been able to capture, like, all the state governments in Australia, the federal government, and you just think...
Well, it helps that they've changed the language. I mean, if you said we're going to perform breast amputation on 15, 14-year-old girls, it doesn't sound as palatable as saying gender-affirming care.
Yeah.
The young,
they're always
the young trans kids.
That's it. And that's why they're masterful at impression management, and they are wonderful at sales and marketing. That's right. So if I were to come up to a teenager, and that's why they don't want you to show any pictures of, here it is, top surgery. What is top surgery? It's double mastectomy. They have to play with language. And so, yeah, gender affirming care. Or how about this one? No conversion therapy. They captured a term. Well, what does it really mean? Conversion therapy. Well, at first, it sounds like you're going to influence this kid. Well, how about if I'm a parent and a cult grabbed my kid without me knowing it? Little by little, this cult, Hare Krishna fishnets, So before I know it, my kid, I see the kid outside of LA International Airport. What used to happen in the 70s, they looked like they were hippies and they had little symbols on their fingers and they're dancing around waiting for people to toss money in a basket. That used to be, back in the 70s, how the Hare Krishnas would make some of their money. I remember going to LAX and there's a group of them outside the door, like on Christmas time for I'm not equating the Salvation Army, right? But they would be right outside the doors doing their little symbol, and chanting, and people would give them money. Hare Krishna. Well, eventually they couldn't do that any longer. But can you imagine walking along and seeing your daughter? And this used to be the case, right? These cults would go to colleges and universities. And the question is, how did they get these kids? Well, they would go to Princeton, they would go to Harvard, they would go to upper level schools, and eventually they're grooming them. And a lot of women are susceptible, some guys as well, but in some of these cults, the majority are women. Why? Because the cult leader wants more women for obvious reasons. And so little by little, they capture the minds and they capture the allegiances and the loyalties, and they do exactly. Now they're going to pit, we're your new family, we're your new community. And those people, your family, they didn't care about you. And as a matter of fact, they want to take you away from us. We're the only ones that understand you. This should sound familiar, by the way. And I'm just talking about Hare Krishnas. Okay, but you can see the same terms, right? So can you imagine we're in Los Angeles International Airport or Sydney or wherever, and we walk by, we're going to catch an airplane, and there's our long lost daughter. And we look, and it's like, I'm going to make it Jane. Jane would look at us. She has voice recognition, and she looks up. What's going to happen with Jane? We're going to see the same internal dynamics take place that are taking place within those kids that have been sucked into the trans movement. They're now part of a family. They even say, we're your new family, glitter family. And your parents don't understand. So it's divide and conquer. The question is, if we were to try to get our kid back, what would we have to do? Different methods. We can hire a guy to snatch him, put him in the back of a car and drive him to sometimes they used to, we'd call those deprogrammers. But in a way, the deprogrammer would do exactly what we would have to do, which is help replant proper thoughts. Like, we're not the enemy. We're your family. We care about you. And, you could see that internal struggle. Well, what would the glitter family, what would the Hare Krishnas say? Because they would probably file suit. They would say that we kidnapped their member. So they're going to file suit against us. So now we have to go to court along with the deprogrammer. So they're filing suit against us. We're the family, literal biological parents. And now we've got the people that brainwashed our kid taking us to court. What's their premise? What's their primary argument where they're going to seek not only our kid back into their cult, but now they're going to ask for punitive damages? What are they going to say we did? They're going to say we converted their child. We used conversion therapy. We converted them away from their true family. Cults use the term conversion therapy, and it's a ruse. And these stories that are made up when you press these few people that say, I went through conversion therapy, like Sam Brinton in the US that stole all the women's luggage. Okay. When you ask, oh, what's the name of the therapist? Oh, I don't know. I was so traumatized. Now, meanwhile, they can say, I remember they put it on my pinky first and the shock treatment, and then it went on my middle finger. We got all these details. What's the therapist's name? Oh, I can't remember those details. Oh, where's the office? Oh, I can't remember. Oh, well, they would never make this story up, would they? Really? They seem so sincere. So did Sam Brinton, until we started finding out he was stealing women's underwear, getting access to the luggage to get the underwear. John, how do you know he's stealing underwear? Why didn't he ever return it? Well, he says he can't remember. Oh, he can't remember. But he used the same luggage to take trips with and wearing the garments. What about the underwear? I'll tell you where the underwear went. He used it to masturbate and then threw it away. How can you say that? I worked with sex offenders for 15 years. That's how deviant these guys are.
Yeah. So there's no hope then?
No, once a guy, I mean, I always want to believe, I do sex offender treatment. I always want to believe there's hope, or I wouldn't do it. How many guys do I believe there's hope for? Not many.
Yeah.
But with the guys, but that's in sex offender treatment. These guys that are dressing in women's underwear and drag, because they have women's underwear under that. Maybe some of them don't. By the way, you notice it is the XY chromosome guys in the women's room that are taking photographs of themselves. If you you do a Google search and say, pictures of self in bathrooms, what percentage of males will come up versus females? Biological males. It's all men.
Yeah.
Girls don't go into, Girls don't go into washroom, take a picture of themselves. Why? Because it doesn't enter their mind. What are the guys? It's a trophy.
Growing porn genre as well. These guys in toilets and changing rooms.
Yeah. Why do they do that? Why do they go into the toilets and take a picture of themselves? Because it's a trophy.
Yeah.
They're mocking the women.
They're very overt about it too.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's what the public needs to understand as well. Biological females, XX, if they do female to male, you don't see girls that now are taking testosterone, looking like guys, taking pictures of themselves in the toilets. But it's these guys. Why? Because they've been in there masturbating. Now they're there, and they're sending a message to all the other perps that this is easy pickings here. And why do they have a cell phone camera in the toilets? They're deviant. They're doing stuff in the stall next to the women. And if you don't think they are, you're a sucker.
Yeah. Yeah. And
all the women know it, right? They know when all of a sudden it's like, wait a second, those are not normal feet. Everybody, right? If everybody's sitting on the toilet in the public washroom, it's like, that guy's a little too quiet. And everybody knows the difference between a male and a female sitting next to each other in a stall, right? And what do you think the guy's doing? He's listening to you breathe. He sees your feet. He's been watching porn the night before. He's masturbating right next door. He's a threat.
So how do you think once they start to lose control, because I've got faith that this can't last, maybe I'm an idiot, but so because we've seen what happens with cults, like you were talking about Jonestown, how that ends. How
do I think it? I don't think it's going to end. I mean, unless this is stopped, it's not going to end. Why? Because if I'm a deviant guy, now I'm not, but I'm going to put on the mindset. Okay. I am now close to what would be nirvana. I'm close to the perfect opportunity. It's a brave new world. It's wonderful. What is that all about? Meaning, I don't have to risk going to prison anymore. I don't have to climb trees and look in second-story windows. I first of all can track and trace you if I want. So let's say I go into a gymnasium or I go into a gym or a spa. You don't think I'm also figuring out what your vehicle is? You don't think I'm learning about you? You don't think I'm learning about your habits and patterns? What do you think I'm doing with my cell phone in there? I'm uploading pictures. I'm taking pictures, uploading them. I'm getting money. I don't have to go to prison anymore. This is a gold mine.
Mm.
Now, some guys, that's about where they'll stop. Others may meet some people, may meet some women who are believing them and thinking they are nice guys. Well, where do those nice women end up? I can tell you from a number of the men that I've dealt with, they end up in basements. They end up never being heard from again. They end up being traumatized. And they're threatened, and they won't talk. Now the question, and they're invited to homes with kids. And the question is, are we willing to take that chance? Because if I know that with this movement, it's becoming less likely that I'll ever have to do prison, and if I have to do prison, I'm going to a female prison?
Yeah.
That's not a bad deal.
Yeah.
I'm pretty good with that. And I'm also going to be able to begin to get you involved in things. Maybe I'll start with OnlyFans. And eventually, I'm making money off of you because now I'm prostituting you out by degree. And if you have teenage daughters, I may be doing the same with them. And so you don't even know how far I'm sucking you into stuff because you think I'm a sensitive guy that's dressing in drag and just needs to be understood. You don't know what's in store for you. So why am I ever going to want this to go away? Plus, if I'm a pedophile, I have no problem being very patient. So this is the perfect gold mine to dumb down the intuition of the public. And eventually what's coming down the pike is exactly what's going on in California right now. These are two prongs of a pincer movement, which is decreasing age of consent and the disparity between the two ages. So now in California, if you're a homosexual predator, age 24, you can target a kid that is age 15. How old is a 15-year-old? Junior high, middle school, or just into high school? You're 24. That's beyond college age. You'll never have to worry about being put on the sex offender registry in California. Now it's a sanctuary state. You can kidnap you can harbor a runaway. No, you facilitate transport across state lines into California. You not only are not charged, but that child is put in foster care, specialized foster care homes, or put in somebody else's home. Now, if you're not going to affirm the child that's apparently just passed in California, now, of course, just like in Canada, probably in Australia, you can lose custody of that child. Where's the child going to be placed? With those that understand, with specialized homes. Who do you think's in that specialized home? Men that are dressing how?
Mm. Yeah.
Because it's a young boy, let's say, and a young boy's dressing as a girl. That means he's coming from a traumatized situation in one way or the other, and he runs away. Now he's going to be exploited. These kids are going to be exploited. The Trevor Project, coming out of the U.S., is based in West Hollywood. Well, I used to live in Southern California for 20 years, and I can tell you West Hollywood is a hub for runaways. Why? Because the music industry and Hollywood. So these kids that run away, they think they're going to be able to make it. Where are all the predators? It's the most shark-infested social waters. Well, isn't it interesting? The Trevor Project that has been found out through undercover parents who feign being young people, that on their helpline very quickly shifts to, within 3 sentences, to gender-related questions. And so it's a perfect means of exploitation. Sam Brinton, the guy that stole women's underwear, worked for the Trevor Project prior to the Biden administration hiring him. And he was in a very strategic position to set policy. And he advocated for what was called Rent Boy magazine. The FBI was going after them. Sam Brinton appealed on their behalf. The term rent boy comes out of the Netherlands for young male prostitutes. So this entire movement by predators is to not only gain access to women, vulnerable women, but vulnerable kids, ultimately to exploit them in whatever fashion, either perping on them themselves and or getting them involved in prostitution. And with the film Sound of Freedom, this should concern us all, because how many of these kids come out of troubled backgrounds? 40% in Canada come out of the foster care system, and these kids easily can never be heard from again. Or you can make it so that they're never heard from. They're already cross-dressing. These boys are. They've been accessing sissy porn. So guess who they're going to end up, quote unquote, having sex with? No, they are going to be the victims of anal rape by male predators. And these girls who think, well, I'm going to dress like a boy, won't have to worry about it. Well, guess who's starting to check them out? The male predators. It's the Male Predator Protection Act. This entire movement is, and women ultimately need to be very careful, because the next thing is the womb, the artificial womb. And what are these guys doing? What I've said is, what I see eventually is this is the ultimate way of silencing and bringing into submission women. This is the ultimate silencing of women, and the only use that these men will have for women are sex slaves. Literally. Talk about barefoot and pregnant. This is silent and submissive in being a sex slave. Women won't be in the picture. If these deviant guys have their way, after they beat the hell out of women, what are they going to do with these women? They'd shoot them in the head if they could. So they don't want women around. Why? Because these are deviant men. And so the only way they would want women around is 50 Shades of Grey. You'll be locked up in a dungeon.
Yeah. Is why
women need to understand that.
It's just so important that we keep shouting, speaking out where we can, if we can.
Yeah.
Whoever can, just it's time now to start speaking out about this.
If you don't, look at what happened to Moira Deeming.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Those perps knew exactly what they were doing. Those were all perps come walking across, marching across as Nazis. That was all staged. Those are all perps. Yeah. Those are all porn accessing guys.
Yeah.
To shut women down. They don't want women speaking. They want women silenced. And if these female politicians are just useful idiots, or they are the equivalent of pimps.
Yeah.
Right. Meaning they're either running part of this racket. But ultimately, every woman, these different women, better understand that even the ones that are helping these guys, at some point in time, their usefulness will be done. No woman is safe around these deviant men, because porn creates a malevolence, a deep hatred, a disdain on the part of guys to women. No woman is safe around a guy that's been accessing porn for years. His brain has changed. He's become a sexual psychopath. How do you spot a sexual psychopath? He doesn't stand out in a crowd, does he?
Yeah.
It's pretty dark, isn't it? It really is.
It's a huge concern.
Yeah, it's a big concern. But
by the way, furries, let me throw that out. This is different than what we're talking about. But again, predators will use anything to access vulnerable women and children. If anybody has not heard of furries, it is one of the most dangerous things. It's adults dressing up in big animal costumes like at Disneyland or sporting events, mascot-like costumes. I first heard about furries. I've talked about it. I've done podcasts on it. I'd never heard of furries. I had the same look on my face as you did on yours. I never heard about it until my 12th. I worked 11 years, 2012. So probably year 9, working in the prison system, working with sex offenders, and had a very heinous sex offender, a pedophile. He was getting out. I couldn't stop him, even though I tried to write a report. But anyways, he was getting out. And so I figured, well, I might as well try to get the information out of him. So you kind of take a different tack then. And he was happy to tell me about different things that he used to access kids. And he says, we do the furries. And I said, what are furries? He said, you never heard of furries? And I said, what are furries? He says, you need to get out more often, Mr. Uhler. I said, okay, probably true. He said, furries. And I said, I don't know it. He says, costumes. I said, right. He says, like at Disneyland. He says, a mascot. I said, mascot? Oh, yeah, you need to look it up. There's a lot of us out there. And I said, so you wear furries? And so I'm still kind of chuckling. He says, they can't see who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And kids
So
are
if you look up online, just do a simple internet search, do furry convention.
Yeah.
Watch what you see. It came out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the US. And it is one of the favorite, first of all, it's one of the most deviant, sexually deviant activities. And they're very closely associated with zoophiles, which is a rebranding of bestiality. Yeah. Self-admission, 20% of furries are zoophiles. Okay. But it is the perfect way. They're very sexually deviant. I've written about it. Somebody can go on my YouTube channel and find out different things. I've talked about furries, but learn about it from heinous pedophiles. And they are the most aggressive. If you start to reference furries on social media, you will be descended upon. Why? Because they don't want the public knowing about them. Why? About the fact that it's filled with perpetrators and deviants and predators. Why? Because they're targeting kids. Why? Because they want access to kids. So if you're a parent, do not have anything to do with furries, because you'll get into, your kid will be introduced to the most deviant of stuff, including deviant art, and that's how they also groom the child's mind. So as an aside, but that's the same thing. So by day, they could, these deviant guys could be reading to kids, dressed as drag, reading to kids in libraries, and then they take that off and they're going to put on a women's swimsuit and go into the women's toilet area, change area. They're going to be on the swim team. That's in the afternoon. And by night, they're going to dress up as furries, accessing young kids in furry conventions, fur cons. So these guys are very dangerous. Once given over to deviance, they're always, always on the prowl.
Yeah, because they're definitely trying to get rid of the bestiality laws as well.
Of course, they're always. As a matter of fact, I found the progression. You can match the category of offense with the kind of pornography that they were looking at, and I didn't know this, but you will inevitably find that prior to a guy becoming a pedophile, as far as the kind of porn he was accessing, it all converges. It's what is called barely legal. The regular sex offender, which sounds strange to say, the regular sex offender will stop at barely legal at puberty and back away from that. The pedophiles will continue downward, and they will inevitably access bestiality prior to accessing child rape porn. That shows you how deviant these guys are, how twisted and perverted these guys are. Any pedophile, they've already been accessing bestiality. So these are the kind of guys that want access to kids, and these are the kind of guys that want access to the private spaces of women. Women need to understand, and politicians need to understand, that this is a grand scheme being pulled. The wool is being pulled over the eyes of all good people by very dangerous, porn-fueled, sexually deviant men. And they're laughing all the way to the bank and seeing how far this thing can be taken, because the ultimate goal is being able to have unfettered access to kids.
And that's why they want to stop us from talking. Because Leah and I and a number of other women go out and do street actions. And so we know that the public doesn't support this, but it's the fear that stops them from speaking out. So then it looks like there's hardly anyone that is opposed to it, when in reality it's fear that is stopping it. So,
yeah. And we are the last defense of the children as well, because we're women. So, and we're never going to allow this to happen.
Yeah,
that's right. What's happening now is the equivalent of Dunkirk, to be honest. That the women people are going to be driven into if they don't stop this, if women don't rise up, what I say about it here in the US is, where are the Million Women March with all the pink hats?
Yeah.
Okay. They used to say abortion's an existential threat. Really? No, these deviant men that wear shirts that say kill TERFs, they're really serious.
Yeah, they are.
So I can't be any more emphatic to women and men, and I come from a Christian perspective. I cannot believe that there's silence on the part of faith-based communities and churches. Churches need to get their act together. Why? Because these deviants are coming for them as well. Yeah. They're going to come into your congregation. They're going to shut you down. They're going to set you up, anybody of faith. they're going after churches. They're going, and if good people do not stand up, and especially good, strong, reasonable, protective, chivalrous men, they need to understand that these deviants are coming for women and they're coming for kids. And we better act now while there's still time.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I think that's a good place to end it. We have our monthly Speakers Corner on the 8th of October at 12:30 outside Parliament. So hopefully anyone sees this and decides to come along, that'll be great, because we just stand there and talk about this kind of stuff until we are not allowed to, when the hate speech laws come in soon as well. Even then, we're going to still do it. But thank you, Jon, for joining us. I really appreciate your time. I'll put a link to where people can find you on the socials and your excellent YouTube channel as well, which is really informative and great. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Jon.
I appreciate it very much. Keep up the good work.
Yeah,
Will do. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.